Welcome to the Dark Academicals, the podcast where we delve into the mythos of dark academia one book at a time. I'm Sophie Waters.
And I'm Sarah Purnell. And this episode we're looking at Madam by Phoebe Wynne. The novel follows Rose Christie, a young, passionate educator who has just secured a position as head of classics at a prestigious all-girls boarding school, a place where tradition rules supreme. However, from day one, Rose can sense that something isn't right, and we follow her journey as she uncovers the horrific truth behind Cowdenbery Hall's wide acclaim. Phoebe Wynne's Madam is a darkly oppressive, female-centric story, weaving compelling feminist interpretations of ancient Greek myths with a strong Gothic influence. It is a bold reimagining of the mad woman in the attic concept gifted to us by Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre.
I never made that connection.
I think they reference Jane Eyre at least twice.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Is it Francis, I think?
I think so. And Rose's apartment is literally like upstairs in a...
Yeah, that's true.
Sort of an attic space.
I think we're going to introduce the novel and kind of give you a bit of a rundown because some of the terminology that's used in the novel is going to be a little bit confusing if you don't really know what the setup is. So we're going to go into that a little bit and then we'll start discussing the novel. But this is your big, huge, massive spoiler warning. Because this book has a lot of twists, a lot of turns, and a lot of big revelations. And we're about to ruin them all. Basically.
If you haven't read the book yet, this book is about to be ruined for you. So
yeah, exactly.
You have been warned. Probably the biggest plot twist, I think, about this book is that... I don't
even know if it's a plot twist. It's like, it's the revelation, isn't it?
It's the realisation.
Yeah.
I think because, okay, when we tell you this, if you have read it, you'll be like, yeah, we know what you're talking about. But if you haven't, and you get to this point and you don't know about it in the book, you kind of knew that that was what they were alluding to. But then it all reveals itself and it's really quite horrible because of the depths it goes. You don't quite believe how dark and deep that it's willing to go, and it goes there.
Yeah, it's very shocking in parts.
Yeah.
Essentially, this school is grooming girls to be auctioned off as wives, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
They are taught the things that their prospective husband wishes them to be taught. They're taught manners and beauty and...
conversation.
Yeah, the feminine arts of the 1800s, essentially. Bear in mind, this is set in 1997, I think?
1993.
And yeah, they basically they're introduced to court at the end, and they get selected by rich, old, white men in...
Not always old, if you're lucky.
Mostly.
But mostly.
I think only one of the girls says, oh, you've all got old codgers or something.
Yeah.
They're mostly of that description.
Yes. Once they get to a point where they are essentially arranged, there's been an arrangement between like the girl's family and the buyer. I don't know what else to call it, really. The prospective owner of her.
That's essentially what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's then that he can ask for certain things, isn't it?
Yeah.
Promises, they call them.
So this is sometimes innocent things, like, well, as innocent as it can be. Kind of saying, oh, I want her to learn classics. I want her to learn dance.
Yeah, horse riding, archery, skiing.
Yeah. But although it's never really touched upon, I think there are some darker kind of requests that the girls don't ever really disclose.
Yeah.
Or discuss, do they? But they're definitely hinted at there quite a lot.
I think it's fair to assume that anything goes.
Yeah.
For the right price.
Yeah. Definitely. They're just paying. It's just, it's so gross. And I remember the moment as I was reading and it suddenly clicked and I realised what they were doing. I was like, it can't be. It can't be. So I carried on reading, and like now I'd realised it, everything was falling into place, and I was horrified. It's not an easy book to read.
No.
It's brilliant, and it's wonderfully written, but it is so dark, and it's difficult in a lot of places. It's not necessarily an enjoyable read all the time, but it's very compelling, because even though most of these girls are honestly quite horrible, you do end up sympathising with them quite a lot.
So another term that we might end up using a lot is value.
Oh, yes.
So that's essentially what the girls, that's how they kind of encompass it all. They're working on their value.
Yeah.
And I think it works in different ways, in the sense that it is literally they're working on how much they are worth to somebody. But it's also a sense of like their values, as in like they're working on different, I don't know what you call it. You can't even call them classes, but you know what I mean? Different
attributes.
Yes.
Selling points, basically.
Yeah.
And lots of these like terms are used a lot by the girls before Rose knows what they actually mean. There's very much a language at Cowdenbray that kind of keeps it all a secret and keeps it all wrapped up in mystery.
Yes.
But then once it clicks, that language behind it makes it even more horrifying, I think.
I think it's very cleverly wrapped up in a way that if somebody from outside overheard them talking about it, you could easily brush it off as it's just, it's a very traditional place, you know, it puts emphasis on values and
yeah, you only have to listen for a little bit more carefully, and you'll start to go, there's something a little bit wrong here. But I mean, even the school, they don't call the school Cowdenbray, they call it Hope.
They do. And it's an institution.
Yes.
That's what Vivian calls it, the deputy head. So this isn't just a school, it's an institution.
I think that applies in quite a lot of ways.
Yes.
Really. Yeah, it's a very claustrophobic environment, and the novel feels claustrophobic.
Yeah.
As usual, we're going to kind of break apart the novel and look at what makes it a Dark Academia title, if it is a Dark Academia title at all. As usual, the cornerstones of Dark Academia that we're going to look at are a higher education setting, old Gothic architecture, a preoccupation with classical studies, murder, a dark, moody and or haunting vibe, hero worship of a particular figure or author, old money, which will collide with new money or no money, weather as a literary device, and undeveloped social skills or the protagonist portrayed as an outsider. So, higher education setting. So it's not a higher education setting, this one.
No.
But it's, we rarely leave the school. It's very much in that educational setting. It's
on campus. They're not even allowed to leave.
No. I mean, the teachers aren't even allowed to leave.
No.
And it's got this reputation as this elite, kind of prestigious school, but no one really knows, what makes it that other than its history.
Yeah.
And I guess the marriages and the matches and the girls that it breeds, really.
Yeah, because there's definitely no academic success, really, because it's not pushed. The girls sit their GCSEs, they rarely sit A-levels.
Because it's not needed, because they're married by that point.
Exactly. And they have people in the right places to make sure that the school stays in the right standing.
And there's even a point, isn't there, where I think Rose grades one of the essays of the girls. We don't know what the grade is, we don't know any of that information, but like that girl's head of house comes to Rose and says, "You've given her a low mark. What did you give her a low mark for?" Rose is like, "Well, it was a bad essay." She's like, "No, we can't have that. That's not acceptable. That's not right." Because it's not about the academics. They're there for show.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle for producing wives, essentially.
Yeah. And even though it's not a higher education setting, I think there's this emphasis on studying more like considered highbrow subjects that people often don't pick up until you hit university or higher education. So
Yeah. It's that elitist setting, isn't it?
yeah.
And also, I think that the topics focus on kind of old English values, don't they?
Yeah.
Like, harks back to kind of all of the things that a girl would learn in the mid-19th century. Those that were lucky enough to learn.
Yeah.
You know, it very much kind of emulates that, even in their dress as well.
Oh, we haven't talked about the uniform yet, have we? Because the uniform is horrific. They're in these like brightly coloured floaty dresses with bodices of all things and little like shawl sweater things that they have to wear at all times. No taking it off. Yeah.
The flashbacks to some strict classes at secondary school there.
Yeah.
Have to put your hand up to take your blazer off. And this is way worse. And there are like little alterations to the uniform, like with each year group, aren't there?
Yeah.
That kind of defines it. I can't remember exactly what the alterations are. But
I think the upper sixth, or the sixth form, they wear brighter colours, don't they? So they've got,
oh yeah,
they can express themselves in the way they dress in different colours, in pastels and
jewel tones.
Yes. I mean, even the uniform is created with like the male gaze in mind, because I mean the way one of the I think he's a history teacher, the older chap who's like leering on 14-year-old.
Yeah.
I can't remember which girl it was.
Is it Daisy?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because obviously she's growing and she's growing into a woman, she doesn't quite fit her like younger uniform anymore, and he's convinced that she must be older, which he's actually hoping that he gets the chance to see her at the class that is called Worship, where the girls learn how to service their men.
I think
by practicing on their own teachers.
I think that the word was preparing for coupling or something like that. Something disgusting like that. I think that uniform's also containment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very restrictive. You can't run in that kind of outfit. You can't slouch. Your body is held in a specific way by that outfit, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that extended kind of control.
So, definitely has the right kind of setting, I think, for a dark academia book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the old Gothic architecture of the school comes into that as well.
Yeah.
Because it's an old, they call it a castle, don't they?
Yeah, it was built in the baronial style, whatever that means. I'm not
really
an
know
architect.
What that is. But there is this great quote, and it's called "The Great Monster of the School Building, as if at any moment it might hoist itself up on its hind legs and unfurl, with thick turrets, black scales down its back, and crawl heavily into the waters below." That's such a brilliant description.
It is.
It's so visceral. I love it.
I think as well what's interesting is the building itself is quite oppressive, but that old structure is also what aids its downfall. So when it burns to the ground, It's because it's old that it can do that. And I think that it's a great metaphor for the antiquated systems that are being pushed at the school. Mm-hmm. They're so fragile and they're so easy to burn to the ground, and yet either they still stand, or when they do get burnt to the ground, they rise up yet again. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That's such a good point, though, because all through the novel, there's so much pushback at Roses of, you won't topple us, you won't defeat this, because, we've got so many people in the right places, you've got so many big names and powerful names and lots of money that will kind of destroy anyone who tries to take it down. Yet all it took was one of the girls lighting a fire in the headmaster's office to bring it all to the ground.
There's just so many good symbolic moments and like chances to interpret metaphor, because you know, when someone says that, you know, they've you want to light a fire in someone, do you know what I mean? And
I know what you mean. I think that also ties back to kind of the way that classics and mythology kind of hold through the novel.
yeah,
Because obviously, like, the basic thing is that, you know, Rose is a classics teacher. She's the head of classics. But it is these women of mythology that inspire the girls.
yes,
They are the ones that light the fire. They are the women and goddesses that were oppressed by everyone and everything. And yet they still found some kind of way to stand up for themselves. They found some way to advocate for themselves. Even if it didn't, you know, end in them kind of getting their freedom, they caused a ruckus, you know?
that's true. And I suppose also in Jane Eyre, who was it who started a fire?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I thought it was interesting how there were, like, the direct stories of some of the women throughout. And these stories kind of reflected not only Rose's state of mind and Rose's frustration, but also kind of almost foreshadowed what was to come in that next little section.
Yeah.
So we had Daphne, we had Medea, we had Medusa.
The Io or Eo? Yeah, there are a lot.
Our next kind of point of dark academia that we measure things against is murder. And there isn't any murder in this one. Or is there?
Well, that is the good point, because I just wrote death.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of death, but on Rose's part, there's not any necessarily willful or complicit murder.
No.
So usually it's the main character in a Dark Academia book that is involved in murder. And I suppose you could argue that she was involved in murder, but she didn't. It wasn't like she could have done anything. Like, the girls set a fire, and it burnt the place down and trapped, was it hundreds of people inside?
300 and something, wasn't it?
Yeah. But there was nothing that she could have done.
No.
She couldn't, there was no alarm to raise. She couldn't have gotten any more people out than she did.
No.
And she didn't start it, so.
But I guess the girls technically murdered all of those people. It wasn't deliberate, it wasn't their intention, but they did cause their deaths.
Yeah.
And I guess I know she is technically alive, but the school's treatment of Jane, they essentially kind of left her an empty shell, didn't they?
Yeah.
We don't really ever find out what they did to her.
Nothing great.
No. Or whether it's just the environment that sent her mad, but she did lose herself.
Yeah.
As a result of that school. And
Bethany
also committed suicide as a result of, you know, this school and the oppressions of it. So with all that death, I mean, I think it's safe to say that there's a dark, moody, and unhaunting vibe there.
Yes. I mean, I wrote that it's giving me very Only Ever Yours ickiness in that dark vibe. So if you don't know Only Ever Yours, I suggest that you go and read it with caution. I think you have to be in the right mood and the right frame of mind for that. It's by Louise O'Neill, and I think it won the YA Book Prize.
I think it won the first ever YA Book Prize. Yeah. Do check the trigger warnings for that one, because it is intense.
Yeah. But similar kind of I think haunting fits books like this and books like Only Ever Yours in the sense that after you've read it, not necessarily during, but afterwards, I think it's quite haunting.
Oh, definitely. I think especially when you kind of reflect on how even though this feels like an exaggerated version of society or the treatment of women, there's a lot of it that isn't that exaggerated.
Yeah.
And I think that slowly kind of builds, and that is haunting.
I think there's also just that, just an oppressive sense of being trapped in the immediate situation, but, you know, like we've said, in a more wider terms of society, like of women being trapped. And I think that follows you throughout the book.
Yeah, and I think the weather plays a huge part in that as well.
Yes, the weather.
We love the weather. It's, you know, it's set up in an isolated part of Scotland. It's an island, isn't it? Is it an island?
It's a
Or is it
peninsula.
just a peninsula?
So
okay.
it juts out a bit.
Yeah. So it's very exposed.
Yeah, it's like
and
perched
isolated.
right on the edge of the North Sea, so the weather is just horrendous a good 90% of the time.
Yeah, and there's not a single nice day weather-wise. In that year she's there, it's perpetually grey and windy and rainy and cold and violent.
Yeah.
It's a very violent surrounding, you know. There's a big, huge storm that kind of cuts off the school for a while. It's inhospitable. And it's kind of like that opening scene to a movie when you see this big, dark house at the back of like a storm blowing down. You're like, bad shit's going to go down here. It's that kind of setup.
I mean, not only can no one literally leave the grounds, but when the weather's that horrendous, like nobody wants to leave the building either. So it's kind of like putting a lid on a saucepan that's boiling. Hero worship of a particular figure or author, and this is one that I struggled with in terms of Rose, because it's not. I don't think it's as obvious for Rose. The only figure I could pick out was Athena.
Okay,
for her,
that's interesting.
Because I think for her it's more of an admiration for female figures in Greek mythology generally.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Their strength and their resilience and...
Yeah, but I think I picked out Athena because of she does mention Athena or Athene a lot, and then she's got the little owl figure as well.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
But other than that, I struggled for her for there to be like a particular hero worship.
Yeah, most of it I focused on like the girls.
Yeah.
Because for most of the novel, it seems to be Clarissa.
Yeah.
The girl from the upper stick, she is basically the epitome of what Cowdenbray teaches as feminine perfection.
Yeah.
She's head girl. She's beautiful. She's always perfectly, immaculately dressed. She's accomplished. She's made a wonderful map. But eventually, the girl's idolatry kind of moves to Rose, in a way.
Yeah.
As she breaks through with them, she kind of goes, through using these mythological women. And I think there's even one point where is it Freddie that says she wants to be like, or she was, she set the fire because she was trying to be like someone.
It was like Dido. I think that was who they were idolising. So we're just like Dido in your stories, madam, wasn't it? Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So it's not as clear cut and obvious in this novel, I don't think, but it's definitely there, and it's a lot more subtle and a lot more complicated. Yeah,
it's not like it's not as an obvious obsession as it is in, say, like The Secret History, obviously.
Yeah. They almost they find these idols because they need them.
Yeah.
They learn to take what they need from these figures in order to get themselves out.
Yeah.
Whereas in both Secret History and If We Were Villains, it's the idolatry of figures or subjects that causes the downfall.
Yeah.
And the tragedy, I think.
I think it does. And when you think about it, those two books, that we have previously discussed in other episodes are centered around like male protagonists, and they seem to be chasing something. Whereas in Madam, it's very female focused, and there seem to be more running away.
Yeah.
So I think that makes sense.
It's that very feminist kind of idea of women helping other women, isn't it? Holding each other up. Something we're going to talk about a little bit later on in more depth is the feminism in the novel.
So we've also got old money to talk about.
That is a huge part of this book.
Yeah.
But in a really different way to the others.
Yeah, I think so, because pretty much everyone at the school has no assets of their own.
Yeah.
Even though they might come from rich families, they literally don't have anything. I think even Rose questions towards the end if the girls even have their own bank accounts.
Yeah. And there's also at the very end where, the girls are free and living their own lives outside of Cowdenbray. Is it Freddie who can't get away from her dad?
Yes.
He's like, no, you can't do this. You have these 3 options of things you want to do. And she's 25 at this point. But she was deprived of that education that would give her that freedom. She doesn't have any skills to do a job to give her freedom. She's still trapped.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't have anything of her own. And there's a whole lot of looking down on the working classes.
There is. And I think it's also interesting that Anthony, even though he admits himself that he came through an orphanage education system, he's from the Midlands, he grew up in an orphanage, obviously doesn't come from money, and yet because he's male, seems to slot in really well.
Does it? Yeah.
No, exactly. Whereas for Rose, she's come from a fairly comfortable background, it would seem. Her mother was a second-wave feminist. Her father was a lecturer at universities. But it's not enough.
No. She had to work for money, which immediately puts her at a disadvantage, doesn't it? And she's unmarried as well. So she doesn't have any, marital money or status to rely on in that way either. It's a really weird system because the teachers that we actually get to know, really, none of them seem to be from the upper classes.
No, I think because a lot of the female teachers were old students at Cowdenbray, so they are discarded girls that their families couldn't marry off to someone worthwhile.
Yeah.
And so they're almost shamed into staying where they are. Because at least they then can, their families can say, I assume, they either ignore that they exist or they can say that they're kind of helping the cause by jivvying along more young women to be sold off to old men.
Yeah. They're doing their duty as a woman.
Yes.
They can't raise their own children. They'll raise others.
Yes.
Although, is it Emma who has children and a husband?
Yes, she does.
And they're just, kids are shipped off to boarding school. Husband does whatever he does, and she lives at the school full time.
Yeah.
Because these teachers don't have these assets, they are trapped by the benefits of working for Cowdenbray.
Yeah. Benefits in...
quote marks,
yeah.
Obviously. Yeah. These benefits of grooming young girls are, being trapped on an isolated peninsula while your children are shoved into a boarding school and your mother is put in a top-rate care home, but actually she's just there for leverage in case you step out of line.
Yeah.
As is the case with Rose, which... horrifying.
Yeah, her mother is used as leverage. Her father, who has passed away, is used as leverage because of the circumstances of his death. They build a dossier against her based on bullshit just to use it against her, because they say, you know, you'll never work in teaching again if you leave here because of this, this and this. And
yeah, because of that like web of connections that they have in people in power. I think that kind of goes on nicely, sir. Protagonist being portrayed as an outsider.
Yeah.
Because she is an outsider in every way.
Yeah, it's the main vein of the story that she is the outsider.
I mean, it starts fairly kind of standard. She's an outsider because she's new and she's young. And that's fine. You are an outsider when you start a new job.
Yeah.
And when you're the youngest. But it's also because she doesn't know the secret of Cowden Bray.
Yeah.
She is kept in the dark by students, by other teachers, by everybody. But even when she does know, she's still an outsider because she's the only one fighting it.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to be. Whereas before she knows the secret, she's a little bit unsure about what's going on, but she still wants to be accepted because it'll make her life easier.
Yeah.
But then as soon as she knows, she wants none of it.
Yeah.
Thankfully, she's happy to be on the outside of this horror.
And then she stays an outsider though. She, even after leaving, she has no choice but to remain an outsider because essentially she faked her death.
She did, yeah.
So she is forced to live in Italy. I say that like it's a terrible
tragedy.
thing.
Living in Rome, awful.
But she's stuck there again. She has her freedom, but it only goes so far because if they find out.
Yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, that's true.
But so yeah, she's definitely an outsider. The other part of that bullet point, the undeveloped social skills, I don't think applies to her.
No, definitely not.
I think she very easily makes connections. I was going to say make friends, but that's not true. But quite easily
really
relates to people and is happy to approach people and isn't really socially awkward. Whereas a lot of the situations she was in, I would be like, nope.
Yeah, I think I definitely would not have lasted a day.
No.
I think that's the thing that put me off of teaching, really. Having to stand in front of 30 kids. No, thank you. So, as The Secret History is kind of our benchmark of what makes a Dark Academia novel, we are going to do a little mini comparison to The Secret History, even though on the surface there's not really any comparisons. But we've already accidentally made comparisons as we go, because The Secret History isn't just a book, you know. It gets in your brain.
It's a lifestyle.
Exactly. I think one of the interesting things that I noticed, and this was something that I noticed like off the bat, is where it's that similar thing of building up to the ending, you know, this big dramatic finale. You get a flash of in the prologue and you're working towards that.
Yeah.
But it's very much a traditional mystery setup. We don't know what happened. We don't know who happened. We don't know any of the details. It's a traditional mystery, whereas The Secret History is a why story.
Yeah. But
there is also a lot of that why did it end in flames, but it's also, I think it had to end like that in Madam. I don't think there was another way out for any of them.
No, there was no other way that Rose was going to be able to walk away from there.
All the girls. Whereas, and it is an inevitability, whereas The Secret History, that it was the choices that they made that led them to them kind of screwing themselves over.
Yeah.
And I think it is that difference of position. It is that male, female binary there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the male characters of Dark Academia have the agency and the control and the assets to dictate their life, even if they do so in a very bad way.
Yeah.
Whereas the tragedy for the females characters has to be brought on by them deliberately to grant them their freedom.
Yeah, it's that duality, isn't it? Whereas, like, for the male characters, they are very action-led, even if it's not a very lively story or lively narrative. They're driving forward with this kind of action, whereas for the female characters and protagonists, they seem to be more reactionary.
Yeah. Well, they're being strung along, aren't they? Especially Rose, with like the drip feeding of the information, the letters, the taunting of, you know, what's going to happen if she doesn't step into line.
Yeah.
You know, whereas, you know, Henry wouldn't take that, would he?
No.
Henry had killed them all, honestly. Whereas Rose still has to kind of measure her morals against her own survival.
The secret history is even mentioned on the front cover. It's another...
Is it?
It's another one that's on the front cover, yeah. It says, Rebecca meets the secret history, gloriously dark, gloriously gothic.
Rebecca is an interesting comparison.
I've not read Rebecca.
Oh,
I know
you need to read Rebecca.
I know of the story, but I haven't read it.
You'd love it though. It is brilliant.
But I think in this case, whereas with Villains, it was almost to its detriment that it had the secret history on the front cover. I don't think it does Madam any harm.
No. I think it's a good way of drawing people in and kind of opening up that discussion of dark academia from a female-centric narrative.
Yeah.
It opens up that space for different discussions because there are lots of topics tackled, that's quite difficult to say, in Madam that are criticisms of Villains and secret history as male narratives.
Yes.
So
yes.
One of those big ones for me is the feminism. I mean, straight off the bat, as you said, Rose's mum was a second wave feminist. You know, active campaigning and protesting, and she was involved in the movement. And that, whether you want that to kind of influence you or not, it's going to shape the way that you view the world.
Yeah.
And I think at the beginning of Madam, it's not so much there. It's, you know, it's vaguely a part of Rose, but it's not like her driving force until she finds out how drastically the rights of these girls are being eroded and abused.
Yeah.
And that is when her feminism comes in. So she's fighting for these girls to have basic human rights and not to be treated as a meat market, not to be treated as if they lived in 1840. But she's not a feminist in an everyday sense, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of trawling through discussions and reviews of Madam, and there seems to be a common criticism that the feminism is almost too basic, that we've moved on from simple explanations of equality and consent, and that it should be more detailed than, you know, women are human beings too. But I don't agree at all.
No, because that's what's under threat in this novel is these women's lives and their own agency.
Yeah. I think the argument is coming from a place of, have we not moved on from trying to showcase that in literature, in like modern literature, like have we not moved on? But I think, you know, I messaged you the other day, didn't I? And I was like, you know, escalating violence and aggression towards women kind of shows that no, we haven't really moved on from that. Like maybe on a surface level, a lot of people are now more accepting of equality and feminism, but it's barely skin deep. I think.
Yeah, it doesn't kind of permeate society. I mean, we still live in a society that punishes women for working, for having children, for not having children. In pay, the gender pay gap is still such a huge issue. In the opportunities available to women, especially older women, and the social expectations of what being a woman is.
Yeah.
You know, the expectation to be kind and quiet and accepting is still very much there.
It's true. And I think also if we're still living in a society where you can't walk home at night without fear of getting offed, then
Exactly.
we still probably need to be having a conversation about basic women's
Human
rights. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it's a similar attitude towards LGBTQIA plus representation in the novel.
Yeah.
Because there is representation, but in the way of a demonstration of the oppression rather than
Yeah. I mean, I think
a clear representation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that it was included. It very could have easily not been. But I think I just wonder about this seemingly dark academia trend to set a book in the 90s so that it's close enough to us to be relevant and modern, but it's in a convenient time period that maybe you can just brush over certain subjects and be like, it's here, look, shh, look, shh, but not too close, shh, no, not too close, it's fine, it's there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can...
It's still a bit tokenized, almost.
Yes. Or it's almost like
Because
I don't have to go in on it too hard, but I can mention it, but I can get away with saying, oh, it was the 90s, to not have to have it explicitly demonstrated.
Mm-hmm. It would have been a much more powerful move, I think, to have Frances as, you know, this girl who was punished and who lost her match and who lost, you know, her position at Cowdenbray because of a relationship with another girl, to have her fighting against it in her own private, even if she can't do it publicly, to privately own her identity in that way. I think that would have been an incredibly powerful move.
Yeah.
Because there were bits early on, I thought maybe that's where that was heading. But it just kind of... It didn't get brushed under the carpet. It got kind of flipped over into, you know, I'm a disgusting person.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trapped here for a reason because it's wrong, because it's unnatural.
Yeah.
And, you know, people do feel that way. That is a thing. But I think it would have been a much more powerful, and it would have been a more powerful statement for Phoebe Wynne to make in this novel.
I think so. I think there are a lot of missed opportunities with queer representation.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it's touched on, and there's so much promise there. It could have been developed a lot into, I don't know, almost a kind of a shout out to the queer community, and kind of like, if you are in this position of oppression or you can't be yourself, you know, you don't have to give up hope on this. You can still be proud in a private way, and then when you have the room and the safety to fully be yourself, then it's waiting for you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that could have been done without, you know, affecting Frances's role, like her role in the plot. I don't think it would have derailed anything at all.
No, I agree.
Another thing that I felt was slightly tokenized was the presence of people of colour in the novel.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah, because the only mentions are a group of Asian girls. That's all we get. There are a group of Asian girls that sit on their own table, segregated, and the word segregated is used.
Yeah. They're in their own house, aren't they? They have it's called House C.
Yeah.
And I think they're all Japanese.
They are. We
girls,
later find out they're Japanese. Yeah. And their exclusion is mentioned briefly by Rose, and it's commented on vaguely, but it's not explored. It's not taken apart in the way that it could have been.
No, I think the issue with the Japanese students for me is that you could have easily taken them out completely from the book and it wouldn't have impacted on the overall effect at all. So that made me question, why were they there in the first place? And if it was just for shock value, then it wasn't necessary.
But also, why were they just not a part of the story in a more concrete role?
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of, the aim of the school is to kind of draw other countries and other cultures into Cowden Bray as to kind of like broaden their reach.
Yeah.
So it would make sense for them to be a part of the novel, to be in the class, to be part of the group. I thought it was a very odd choice.
Yeah.
And I really, really did not like it when the Japanese students were dressed up as geishas.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very niche thing for that group of girls to know how to do in the first place.
It's a very specific cultural and very kind of sacred and protected Japanese art.
Yeah.
But in the novel, it's taken apart as they're dressed up as geishas and they serve. Yeah, I didn't understand the need for that, and I don't agree with that being.
I can understand, I think, the idea of having the students from different countries involved, because it would be a bit like, from a business point of view, I want to pull in all the strongest business partners I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't know why there wouldn't have been different international students, or why Japan was singled out specifically. Like, I don't know if there was something like to do with the economy at that point in the 90s or something. Like, I don't know politically enough about that time period, if that would have been why, like, Japan would have been chosen. I know they were a strong economy, but to make it, I just can't make it make sense. Whereas you've already got,
I know what you mean,
people there who are looking for wives from countries like Germany and Russia and France. I assume that's why they're learning all those languages. Then why don't they also have international students from there?
Yeah, definitely. It's a odd choice. And it didn't sit right with me, to be honest.
I was going to talk about the owl briefly again.
The owl.
The owl. I just thought that the owl was a really interesting symbol throughout. And I think especially because this was a reread for me, I kept noticing it again. So I just wondered if the owl, I suppose it does tie into character discussion. So, you know, the owl is intrinsic to how Rose is feeling. Not necessarily feeling, but like her state of mind. Yeah, I felt like, and how the owl gets moved, and then when it's finally broken, she mentioned something about how her owl is now flown out across the sea or something. I'm not sure, but I just thought it was very also fitting that it represents Athena, who is the goddess of war and wisdom, which is essentially Rose's role at Cowden Bray. So
yeah, that's true. And I think where that point is, where the owl is broken, it's Frances who breaks the owl, isn't it? Or was it one of the girls who was?
It's either Frances or it's Clarissa, and I think it's one of those two. One.
But that's the point where she's learned everything and she is spiraling. Yeah. Like, her strength is broken by, constantly fighting, and the threat on her, her mum, her dad's reputation, her own life in some way. is under threat from this, and it's kind of that breaking point for her.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
But yeah, Rose Christie, 26,
somewhere around there,
and is a newly appointed head of department for classics. I mean, what a position!
I know, for a 26-year-old.
Yeah.
But that's also why, you know, she can't say no to this job, because it's too impressive.
I've seen repeated comments, again, whilst I've been trawling through reviews and discussions, of Rose being called hysterical, which I think is a really interesting description to apply to her for this book, don't you think?
In a feminist novel, calling someone hysterical is like slapping someone in the face. I think that her reactions are proportionate to what she is experiencing.
I think so.
I think if I found out that I was involved in grooming young girls for marriage, I would also scream and shout and cry at the people who are enabling this and try to stop it. Well, I hope I would.
I think
that's not hysterical.
I think she could have played the game better. I think...
Oh, yeah, she has zero sense of self-preservation whatsoever.
No, I think once I kind of got a hint of it all going a bit south, and, you know, they're threatening my mother, they're threatening my career, I potentially would be a little bit more subtle about how I expressed myself or expressed my upset. But, you know... She's from what they like to call a very liberal background. And I think you can understand kind of her inability to accept what she's seeing.
Yeah. But also her mental state at the time, you know. She's had 9 months of being broken down and bullied and emotionally and mentally attacked. And she has to come to terms with the fact that, you know, for the last however... 6 months of the school year or whatever, she was a part of this institution, of this creation of these girls. So even though I think Rose was kind of proportionate in her reactions, I do think she was quite naive as well.
Yeah.
That the thought that, you know, she could topple this.
Yeah.
So this kind of plays into the role of, like, the mythological women, I think.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they still fight even in fights they know they can't win. And fights that they're probably going to end badly, but they have to do it because it's right.
Yeah.
So it is naive, but there's also strength in that, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have 100%. I'm not saying I would have just bowed my head and got on with it, but I wouldn't have been able to be as outspoken as she was.
No, I like to think I would have been a bit more subtle, maybe.
Yes.
But at the same time, is subtlety ever going to win against something like that?
No.
It literally took arson.
I suppose backed into a corner, who's telling what anyone might do?
Very true. Is that not, like, the basis of Dark Academia, isn't it? Back someone into a corner, see what they'll do.
Yeah.
Essentially. And I think that's definitely the same for Freddie, who's one of the main girls that tortures Rose for most of the year.
Yeah.
And then ends up she's the one that sets the fire, isn't she?
I'm not sure if it's her or if it was Nessa or Daisy,
Okay, but it's those three as a group.
Yeah. I think
the Furies. Are they the Furies?
Maybe.
Ooh.
He was like, yeah. I think it's interesting that they have nicknames. I think it's one of the only places that they have any kind of autonomy over their own self.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, the house mistresses don't like their nicknames, and I think even Clarissa, doesn't she? She often says, don't call her that, but it's one of the only places where amongst themselves they can have like a sense of ownership over their own self.
Yeah, because I mean, even the teachers are, unsurprisingly, considering the title is Madam, they are all called Madam, and all of the male teachers are Sir. There's no differentiation between them, is there?
No.
And then with the girls, it's not even just those three, is it? It's other, like, there's Lex.
Yeah.
Nessa, Freddie.
I think Freddie plays the game a lot better, but then she's been living in it for years.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd necessarily like peg her as one of the ones who would incite like others into action. I think because of how she gives Rose such a hard time, you kind of get the feeling that she's always on the fence, but could very easily go either way with Freddie.
Yeah, it's almost like she knows the consequences of both choices, and she has to kind of decide what way she falls.
Yeah. I think without her, though, I'm not sure that the other girls would have the courage to do what they did.
No, she's very much the ringleader, isn't she? Other than Clarissa, she's probably kind of the main, idol for the girls, isn't she?
Yeah.
They very much follow her lead. And when she tells them to shut up, they generally do.
Yeah. And she's one of the only girls that we see actually stand up for others.
Yeah, that's true. And that really doesn't happen very often, even with Freddie, does it? No. They are so cruel to each other. She's definitely an interesting character. I think it would have been quite interesting to see the novel from Freddie's perspective.
Yeah, but it is interesting. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that in Madam we see the perspective from the teacher, whereas before we've looked at it from the student.
Well, that's true. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, because I guess we're almost distanced from like what's physically going on in a school because she's a teacher and because she's new.
Yeah.
In that way, we're not in the thick of it. And she is the person that is being looked up to rather than the person looking up to. Yeah. That's a really strange wording there.
So really, we kind of have to ask ourselves, is Madam Dark Academia?
I think it is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think so too.
It has so many of the hallmarks of Dark Academia. I think it also has a hefty dose of Gothic and the female Gothic as well.
Yes.
I think it's not purely Dark Academia. There's definitely Gothic Dark Academia there. And it is also a mystery, which most Dark Academia novels are, but I think it's more prominent in this.
Yes. It's definitely less cerebral than Villains or Secret History, yeah. I think. Not in a bad way, but in I think Madam is probably
it's accessible.
Yeah.
Because the way that, classic studies and these myths and these goddesses, their relevance is clearly explained and clearly outlined. You don't have to go in knowing, Medea's backstory. You don't have to go in knowing who Dido is.
No.
Because it's there for you on the page. And there's also not random Greek or Latin.
There is a little bit of Latin, but it's very clear kind of what it means.
Yeah, they don't like converse in Latin.
No.
It's not pushing the reader as an outsider. You are very much there with Rose and learning as Rose goes. You're not being held at a distance. Which is very different to Villains and the Secret History.
Yeah, I think as a narrator, well, I mean, it's not. It's
Omniscient third, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's a lot more reliable. I mean, obviously, it's more reliable from the point of view that it's third person, but it's more reliable as a narrator than previously.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Final thoughts on Madam?
I like it.
I really like it too. I think it's really brilliantly written.
Yeah, I mean, I will often say, and you've heard me say many times, that I'm not one for rereading books, but I quite happily reread this without an issue.
Yeah, I think it's not an easy read, and I think if you are going to read it, and you have somehow gotten to the end of this podcast episode without having read it, it is now spoiled for you. But if you were going to go and read it, please check the trigger warnings, because it's extraordinarily dark.
Yes.
And it's not an easy read.
And we haven't given away all the bombshells. There are some real shocking moments that we haven't really touched upon. But if you read it, you'll find them.
Yeah. And even if you know, even the stuff that we have given away, the impact of those reveals and those moments is something that you don't want to miss, because they are shocking. The language that came out when messaging Sarah about some of these reveals. It's a lot.
It was a fun journey experiencing Madam for the same time.
Just the all caps. Time. Worship.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, what? It's a brilliant novel. I do highly recommend it. So next time, we will be moving on to something a little bit different. So our intention is, once every season, we're going to tackle a novel that we see as Dark Academia adjacent. And our first pick for this is going to be The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
The summary is as follows. And actually, let me just say this. It was so difficult to find a summary for Gatsby because it's so well known, and so there's so many editions that often it's just listed as The Great Gatsby, you know, the one.
Yeah. Like I've read this book maybe twice, I think, but I don't know if I could summarize it.
Well, I found a nice concise one. Thank you,
Perfect.
Goodreads. Not sponsored yet.
Sadly.
Jay Gatsby is the man who has everything. But one thing will always be out of his reach. Everybody who is anybody is seen at his glittering parties. Day and night his Long Island mansion buzzes with the bright young things, drinking, dancing, and debating his mysterious character. For Gatsby, young, handsome, and fabulously rich, always seems alone in the crowd, watching and waiting, though no one knows what for. Beneath the shimmering surface of his life, he is hiding a secret. A silent longing that can never be fulfilled, and soon this destructive obsession will force his world to unravel.
We hope you've enjoyed our episode on Madam by Phoebe Wynne, and we hope you'll join us next time. Bye!
Bye!